Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Emma Young is a former bookseller who retrained as a journalist back in 2011 and who now works as a WA Today reporter and whose articles regularly appear in sister publications The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Emma has won numerous awards for her journalism, including the 2018 Matt Price Award for Best Commentary. Emma was also selected for the Catherine Susanna Pritchard Writers Centre First Edition Retreat in 2018, along with the Four Centres Emerging Writers Program for 2018 to 2019. This month, Emma's debut novel is released by Fremantle Press called The Last Bookshop. It's a charming, heartwarming book that delves into many of the hardships facing small business, the bookselling industry and real estate pressures in modern cities. Listeners, I absolutely loved it, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to Emma in depth about her brilliant debut on the podcast this morning. Hi, and welcome, Emma.
Hello, thank you so much for that lovely welcome.
Congratulations on this absolutely gorgeous book. How are you feeling now that the book is out in the world? Is it everything you imagined?
I'm still kind of feeling very stunned and overwhelmed. I honestly didn't expect people to welcome it so much as they have. And I'm just so pleased that it seems to be doing well and that people seem to be connecting with it in a way that I wanted them to. But after, so many years of rejection and it never being good enough to publish, and suddenly it was, that so I still kind of have that mindset that it's not going to hit that mark that I wanted to. And so to hear people saying these things to me, I kind of have to force myself to believe it. But it's been amazing, and I've had some of the loveliest feedback, including things that I really would have wished it to do, like people saying to me, it's made me want to read this book or that book, or now I feel like getting back into reading. And hearing people say things like that to me is just incredibly rewarding.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. In many ways, Emma, I think this is such a timely story because, of course, book sales lifted during much of last year, during the lockdowns across Australia at least, and possibly globally as well. Though you didn't write with this event in mind, the story certainly does reinforce the power of books and the written word to unite people and communities. So I wanted to ask you, was this something you consciously wanted to write about, and why?
It's so funny that you say that, because it is so well timed, isn't it? It's a book about the power of books to bring communities together and the importance of supporting a local bookseller. And that is exactly what happened across our nation during COVID. And so it's not only coming out at this point where I feel like people need a bit of like a happy release and a bit of escapism, which I hope it is, but it's also coming out at this point where people have just been forcibly reminded of the value of that service and how much their dollar can go to support booksellers. So like you say, it's absolutely freaky that the timing has happened in this way, especially since there was a very long lead time on the publication of the novel. So it was 2019 since they first said they would publish it. So the fact that it's come out right now post-COVID is just an extraordinary bit of timing. And now I've waffled so long that I've forgotten the second half of your question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, was it something you consciously wanted to write about?
I don't think I did initially want to write about that. Like in the beginning, the very earliest conceptions of the book were me wanting to illuminate what life is like behind a bookshop counter and in customer service or public-facing jobs, full stop, wanting to tell those weird and wacky and wonderful bookshop stories. And for a long time, it was just that without a plot. And then later after that, I found a plot through reading an article about a mobile book selling service that allowed a librarian to really get to know some elderly people who were otherwise a bit forgotten by the world. And she discovered incredible things about these older people through bringing them books and talking about books with them and learning about their own areas of knowledge. And that was, I thought, an incredibly beautiful thing. And so I guess to me it was more about wanting to tell the story of individual connections between people that are enabled through talking about books. And then finally, after, I kept adding layers of storyline here. And eventually it dawned on me that, all of those individual connections make up a community, and it is that community that supports a business in the end. So, and because I was writing a lot about small business in Perth and seeing businesses go under, and I had these bookshop experiences and I was seeing, how consumer buying habits could really affect business. So it was later, as those layers were getting added, that I really wanted to tell a story about how communities could really support those businesses that in turn make their communities places they want to be.
Okay, so before we delve deeper into the book, I wondered if you, for those who haven't read the book yet, if you could tell me a little bit more about the story.
It's about Kate Copper. She's the main character, and her bookshop, which is called Book Fiend. And Book Fiend is the last bookshop, general purpose bookshop remaining in the city centre in my imagined dystopia. And it's also the last bookshop remaining, independent shop remaining on what's become an increasingly exclusive street. And times are tough for Kate. Profits are dropping, costs are rising, and there's finally one financial blow that lands that makes her have to reconsider her future as a bookseller. And this book is about what happens next, and it's about all of the unlikely group of friends and community members who rally to make sure that she's not going to go down without a fight.
Now, I absolutely loved Kate. Such a warm, empathetic and genuinely caring woman, probably a little too caring for her own good, I think. So I wanted to ask, where did your inspiration for Kate come from?
I guess it's probably me. It's a version of me that probably a little bit less socially able. I'd like to think that I've developed some better social skills than Kate over the course of my life. Yeah, I don't want to say she's exactly me, because of course people start out, you start out modelling characters on things and then they take on their own life, of course. And Kate's history and the things that, her relationships with her parents and her friends and the things that have shaped her life are different. But in terms of a person who, cares deeply about other people and who feels more comfortable connecting with people through books, that's all me.
I don't imagine you're alone in that respect.
Well, this is the thing, and as I've written the book, it's become more and more clear, that even though Kate is a loner, and I was a loner reader and writer earlier in my life, and even when I started writing this book, I was a bit of a loner as a writer. As the book has developed and got closer to publication, and I've joined some of the many Perth writing community groups and events, it's become clear to me that there's nothing loner about it. It really is an incredible way for people to connect, and there are lots of people who just love to connect through books. So there you go.
I think there is something about talking about books that can really, unite people, particularly writers who can often be introverts.
Absolutely. And it's dawned on me quite slowly that is the case. I think it was a couple of years ago that I started going, okay, I need to be on social media as a writer, but I'm not going to use it in a way that I don't like. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take photos of books because they are the things that look pretty to me around my house. I'm just going to do that. And after a while of doing that, it slowly dawned on me that there are lots of people doing this, and that there's a name for it even. So, we all think that we're all so curiously alone.
There are a number of themes that resonated with me throughout this book, ones that I'd like to spend a bit of time chatting with you about. The first is retail work. And so you've alluded to this in some respects. And when I was at uni, probably like most young kids, although this was a long time ago, I worked in retail, and it may or may not come as a shock to many to learn how poorly retail workers are treated. And I think that the pandemic certainly highlighted the difficult situation a lot of young retail workers often find themselves in. Was this something you wanted to explore, and was this based on your own experiences?
Yeah, to an extent. I think I say something, I recount these things in the book in a funny way. It's not like, she's abused by her customers, although sometimes she's abused. But yeah, the people behind a counter are kind of, because people are so busy, and inherently they're often not shopping for leisure, they're shopping with a goal in mind. They're very focused on themselves, and that I think leads to people kind of looking straight through the person behind the counter and being very preoccupied, and so often being more abrupt or more vague. You know, they don't stop to realise how they come across, whether that be hilariously vague or downright rude or, you know, whatever the spectrum of things there are. As a person behind a counter, you realise the hilarious variety of those people and all of their preoccupations, whether it be the people who want a bag or the people who don't want a bag and are insulted for being offered one because that's bad for the environment, or the people who are insulted at not being offered one because they need one. And so you become aware of all those weird trends in society as well. But yeah, I guess I was treated with all those dizzying varieties of people behind a bookshop counter, and, you know, the people who want to like count their change into your hand one coin by one, or they just dump a pile of change into your hand and ask you to count it. Things like that I figure every retail worker would relate to and would have like a little chuckle to themselves. And every bookseller would know the person who wants the book that they can't remember what it's called or what it looks like, but they remember one completely unhelpful thing about it. Like, you know, it had Satan as a character who, you know, wanted to tempt a young girl or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I did really want to tell these stories, but tell them in like a fun kind of way, not in a you know, mean or like activist kind of way. I just wanted to gently point out people's hilarities.
There was one scene in particular where a woman rang. She was from a library or something, and she rang and she spoke to Kate, and she said she wanted a version of a book, or the clean version of a book, or something along those lines.
Yeah, the clean version of Anne Frank.
And she wanted Kate to like physically go and read it and get rid of all the bits that they didn't want. And I was like, no, she wasn't her personal secretary.
You know what? That was a real anecdote. Like, quite a few of my memories had faded. So I went online and kind of stalked bookseller sites and you know, observed them talking about all the things that customers had done. So I've got a little thank you in the end of the book to all of the booksellers whose like snippets of anecdotes made their way into the book. And that was a real one from a real bookseller.
That's hilarious.
Absolutely
hilarious. Okay, so let's talk about giants of online book retail world, the Amazons and the book depositories. Kate had some scathing commentary about the undercutting of book prices by these retail giants. So I wondered, do you think people are generally unaware that by using these online retailers, they're affecting the bricks and mortar stores and the diversity of physical retail experience?
I don't think they are. Like, I think some people who maybe keep up with the news and are very socially aware people might, but that's not the majority of people. Like, the majority of people, especially in this world that soaks you with information on any topic that you care about, people are very buried in their own worlds, understandably, because to some extent people want to protect themselves from the avalanche of news and information that's coming at them. And so I had a privileged insight into that because I'm a state reporter and I report a lot on the rises and falls of strips and businesses. And so I was hyper aware of what was opening and what was closing across the city. But I think, people are so buried in their own needs and their own totally understandable need to save a dollar that they forget that saving a dollar, you know, on one thing is not the same as saving a dollar on another thing, if that makes sense. So I think it's possible to save money and be smart about money, but still know what's important to you to support and to put your money there. Whereas I think people often don't think about it in that level of detail and they just go, I have to save money. Why would I pay for this recommended retail price at a bookshop when I could get a discounted price at a big department store or online and I could get free shipping? So they just don't think about it in that level of detail. I think that it was another true anecdote in the book where there's a moment where a family is shopping in Kate's store and the son finds a book that he's been wanting for ages and goes, I found this book. And his mother says, get it. And his sister says, no, just get it on Book Depository. And they say, why? And she says, because you'll save on postage. And it's this hilarious irony because you're already in the shop.
Yeah.
You don't need to have it posted. But that is a true story. Like, people just get this feeling like price is all, and they lose sight of all of the values that come with bricks and mortar retailing.
I kind of felt like there were a lot of parallels to this situation, supporting local farmers and things like that, that people are so unaware that by buying imported fruit and vegetables, they're not supporting our own industry. It's the same kind of feeling that I got in relation to this particular argument.
Completely. Shop local is something that applies to everything. And that I think people are getting more aware of, which is an awesome thing. It's a hashtag, it's a phrase, especially since COVID, and anything that, my book can do to further that is really exciting for me, because I am a fervent fan of shop local.
Yeah.
And it costs us sometimes inconvenience, but it brings so much in little circumstances of happenstance and little conversations that you have with retailers, and the joy of being able to know that, the meat and the produce that you've bought is supporting someone who lives not that far from you, and that it's ethical. All of those things are what this book is about.
When I look at the way indie bookstores throughout Australia pivoted during the pandemic, particularly offering drive-by pickups and home delivery, especially for those, less mobile customers, it was so heartwarming. There was also a line in the book somewhere where Bookfiend was described as being the heart of the city. And I certainly feel that dedicated bookstores are so important to the life of a community, but they're a dying breed. And it was only, so in the book, it was only when Kate made a pivotal decision that she realised how important her bookshop was to so many people, don't you think?
I have a couple of bookstores in mind that are like that have been there so long in our city and are such a part of the furniture, as it were. And they're also, it's not just about consuming food or consuming clothes. You know what I mean? It's, because you've got a few types of tenants, which are food and beverage tenants. You've got soft goods and retail and services. And a bookshop is something else. You know what I mean? It's its own kind of thing where, yes, you're consuming a consumer good, but it's also a place of knowledge and learning and exchanging of information as much as a library. I think that's why people have this strong feeling that the bookshop is this integral part of the fabric of a city.
Okay, so let's talk about the cover. It's exactly the kind of bookshop I love, and I wondered if it was the way that you envisaged or the way that you imagined Bookfiend looked like.
Oh, you know what? It's like, obviously there's some little details that are different, but overall, like the feeling is pretty bang on. The overall look of it, like there are some differences in the layout and the furnishings, obviously, but the feel and the look of it are absolutely bang on. And that is a bookshop that actually exists in Fremantle. So it's a little secondhand bookshop in Fremantle. And I feel like maybe I shouldn't say it because the owner said to me, I hope this doesn't mean there's going to be a bunch of people coming and taking photos of my shop. But it is a beautiful little real shop, and it has exactly the kind of vibe in it that I wanted to create.
I very much enjoyed reading about the wonderful books Kate stocked in her store and the way that she chose books for her customers, especially her mobile customers. That kind of hand selling is just so wonderful. There was also this fascinating thread about the life of C.S. Lewis that Kate and June, her grandmother figure, were following through his biographies. And I was interested to learn of his friendship with J.R.R. Tolkien and their involvement in a literary group called the Inklings. So I wanted to ask you, why was he important to your story?
I'm so happy you asked about that, because it's just like, because the book is about the joy of falling down a rabbit hole and one book leading you to another and another. That was just an example of how that was happening to me at the time that I was writing the book, or just before. I had reread some Narnia and I had read a biography of C.S. Lewis, and I read all those books, not sort of in that order, but I did discover the works of C.S. Lewis and the non-fiction, and it was a time where I was just discovering author biography, which had never mattered to me much in the past. And when I became a writer, I started being much more interested in author biographies, of course, because you can figure out how the hell they did this writing thing while also earning a living. So I became a bit of a devotee. And C.S. Lewis's biography was one of those that I read. It's a fantastic one. And I suppose it dawned on me while I was reading the C.S. Lewis biography that Narnia is such a magical tale, and I don't think people would realise, A, that it was created at a time of great sadness and uncertainty for the world after World War I and before World War II, where there was so much change and sadness. Also that C.S. Lewis himself wrote it in a time of great change and sadness for himself, because there's such incredibly beautiful novels that have inspired so many people. So the discovery of that was a really interesting one for me, and I was totally fascinated by his story, and it led me to read more and more of his works. And so I just kind of included that as an experience for Kate and June, because I thought this is a perfect example of the way a book can just lead you down the garden path and lead you to discover more and more about something that you're very interested in. And then, later I discovered that there was a movie about Lewis and the Inklings when they were younger, and so I then went and watched the movie, and I just wanted to bring that across in the book as well.
It was a really interesting thread, and I went off and Googled his biographies and his previous work. His works on Christianity, I thought were really fascinating, and his other sci-fi novels.
It just allows you to imagine this world, doesn't it, where people just did nothing but read and write and research and talk about what they'd researched and read each other what they'd written, and I just wanted to fall into that universe and devour it. And I'm glad that it inspired the same feeling.
There's always so much to learn, and it never ceases to amaze me how every day can bring a new piece of knowledge into your world. I wanted to move on and talk about the final scene of this for a moment. Kate, by this stage, has been through an emotional ordeal, and she's literally caught between her two potential futures. Whilst I know which choice I would like to think Kate made, why did you leave it open like this?
You know what? This book has been through so many changes. It was actually the suggestion of an old friend who actually was an old friend who worked at one of the bookshops that I've worked at, who was also a writer, and he read the manuscript for me back when I was struggling with it, and it had a different ending then, and he suggested, why don't you leave it open? And I really liked that idea, and I tried to leave it open in a way that if you read between the lines, you can tell what she's going to choose. And I guess I wanted the reader to do that work of reading that scene very closely and working through the thought process that she has. Just because you don't hear what she decides, I feel like the ending that you want her to choose is probably the one that she will choose. You know what I mean? And I feel like we all know which one we want her to choose. So, yeah, I can't take credit for that, and I hope it doesn't upset people because
it didn't upset me at all. It was just an interesting way to end it. It wasn't the nicely tied up bow that I kind of expected. Which is
and initially I had a little bow tied on it, and my old friend just went, "Why don't you do this?" And I went, "I think I will." Yeah. So I can't take the credit for it.
So Emma, from first draft to publication, The Last Bookshop took 5 years to write. Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, you've worked full-time as a journalist, and if I'm not mistaken, you've also written 2 other novels. Tell me how you managed to achieve this, and tell me about your journey to publication.
The third novel is I've only just finished the first draft, so I don't want to sound better than I am. It was a pretty long road, because I think a lot of writers who are maybe more sensible than me start off with short stories and start off with shorter pieces, and they get help and join groups and join the community of writers much earlier than I did. So I think I made things hard for myself by starting very alone and just not having any idea whatsoever how to plot or plan or write a book. I started in this mad kind of, I'm 30 now, I've got to get started. And I just wrote the bits of the plot that I knew, which were not many, on a series of Post-it notes, and I arranged them in a rough order. And I just kind of wrote from Post-it to Post-it on the weekends. I figured if I wrote 1,200 words each weekend day for a year, then I would finish a book. That was as much as I had in mind, like a mathematical breakdown of how long it would take. And so I did that. But, writing Post-it to Post-it like that just means you don't know how to get to the next Post-it. So I ended up writing a lot of waffle. And there weren't any well-crafted scenes or chapters or anything, which explains why the draft was such a mess and took so long to get published. But I kept at it for, 6 months, and then I realised that I was never going to get there with working on the weekends, and I was going to have to bite the bullet and work before work, no matter how unappealing that was, because my day job is also writing and is quite high pressure. So I bit the bullet and I started getting up very early, like, I don't know, 4:45 in the morning, and just doing an hour or two of work before I left for work, and then coming home in the evening and collapsing into bed. And it hasn't done much for my social life, but eventually I got the draft done, took a little break and travelled, and that was when I was taking a break on it that I wrote the first draft of my second book, which is a much easier book with a more straightforward storyline and less going on in terms of plot lines. So that draft of the second book only took about 3 months. After that, it was 2018, and then it was about juggling the two manuscripts and trying to get The Last Bookshop into the hands of agents who would read it and give me almost invariably quite negative feedback. And every time I was waiting for an agent to get back to me, I was working on Thunderbolt Lodge, which is my second book. So I was able to always have a project on the go and make the most, because I kept getting up before work very early every morning and making sure that I always had something to be working on while I was waiting, and I wasn't wasting time and I wasn't just sitting on my hands. And every time an agent told me what needed to be done, I would rewrite the book and incorporate their feedback, sometimes with good results, sometimes with bad results. Eventually, a really lovely agent saw fit to not represent me, but to spend an hour on the phone with me, talking really deeply about what I wanted to do with The Last Bookshop and what was working and what wasn't. And really the best sort of thing that she could say to me was, there are so many problems, but I did keep reading it, which is very demoralising and encouraging all at once. But I really appreciated what that woman gave me, because she made me realise that I was going to have to stop being afraid of my own manuscript and ducking in and fixing bits of it and then flying back out and still not really knowing what was in those 90,000 words. She made me realise how deep the work would have to go and how much I would have to think about the characters and why they were doing what they were doing and what I wanted the book to be about. And after that, I took some time off work. I think it was a fortnight of unpaid leave, and I just, because I'd already run out of annual leave because I kept spending it on writing, and I just hammered this draft and did a complete rewrite of the book in 2 weeks, like crazy, pages spread out on the floor, cutting up the draft, all that stuff. And after that, I ended up with the manuscript that got me a shortlisting for the Fogarty Award in 2019, which was what got me my publication contract. By then, I had also completed Thunderbolt Lodge to a satisfactory level where I'm relatively certain that I'll be able to get it published soonish without too much of the heartbreak that went into The Last Bookshop. So that's how all those timelines came together. And then the third one, I had a very strong deadline because I was pregnant, and I knew I had to get a draft in the bag just to make myself feel better about taking a long break after having a baby. And because I knew that The Last Bookshop would be coming out. So I just made sure that I drafted the whole thing before, I think I was 40 weeks pregnant when I finished the draft. It wasn't
incredible.
Oh, it wasn't a super easy pregnancy either. So I was pretty over it by the end, but I got it out. I can tell you it's not a particularly clean draft by anyone's imagination, but it's going to require a lot of work, I think. It's done. It's all done. The Last Bookshop's coming out. The Thunderbolt Lodge is ticking away on the back burner. I'm pleased with it, and I've got something for the third book. So that's what I've been up to.
Fantastic. I love it. In light of all of this, Emma, what tips would you offer to aspiring writers out there who are listening in?
Stop editing your work before you finish drafting it, because that, as far as I can tell, is just what bogs people down, and they never, ever move forward if they're still thinking about what they wrote yesterday. Tell people what you're doing and when you're planning to finish it so that you'll be embarrassed into finishing, which is the tactic that I use, because I don't want to say I'm going to do something and then not do it. And just anticipate that it's going to take a very long time and a lot of really hard work, and that you're going to get rejected a lot. If you treat those things as expected rather than, a devastating shock, then you will be less devastated and shocked when they happen, and you'll be more likely to treat it as routine and take the feedback of people who are much more professional and know more than you, and you'll be in a better position to just incorporate the feedback and keep going.
Emma, if listeners wanted to find out about you and your books, how can they do that?
They can visit emmayoungwrites.com. I'm on Facebook as Emma Young Writes, Twitter as Emma_J_Young, Instagram as Emma Young Book Fiend. Yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn as well, if you can find me there.
Fantastic. Emma, I thoroughly enjoyed The Last Bookshop and I wish you every success with it. Congratulations once more on a fabulous debut. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Thank you so much, Claudine. That was a pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.